Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the Box Score Network. I am Ben Parker, joined by Austin Freed. This may be the first time for some of you. It's our first time, my first time producing a baseball episode for Box Score Network. So I'm really excited about it. For those of you here to talk about the Hall of Fame vote, we are really excited about the players who got in. Want to talk about some of the guys who didn't, and we're going to go all up and down the list in some way. Not cover every player, but we're going to talk about it pretty good. Austin, how you doing tonight, man? I know you're a baseball savant. I know you specifically tend to be an Atlanta Braves fan from way back in the day. You're an analytics guy. I mean, you are a perfect baseball guy. All right, for those of in the audience who don't know, but how you doing tonight, man? How you feeling?
Good. I'm feeling fine. It's cold weather outside, but I got some hot takes coming.
Oh yeah,
Uh, always, you know that. This is a really fun time. Baseball Hall of Fame is something that I truly care about, and I think it matters, and I have strong opinions on a lot of these guys, whether it be one way or the other. I just to kind of give like a heads up of how my kind of attitude towards the Hall of Fame is. The Hall of Fame is a museum that enshrines baseball history and celebrates baseball. I think it is about putting players who were superstars in their time and changed the game, but also players who changed the game for other reasons outside of just the numbers they end up putting on the page, but because of maybe other boundaries that were broken or other outstanding things they did in their career. And it's not necessarily all about the numbers, as we'll get to. And the numbers are important, but the Baseball Hall of Fame should be much more than just a numbers game.
yeah. And listen, we'll tell everybody again about tricky takes at the end of the broadcast, but I do want to tell everybody Austin and his guys because they are hardcore. They're not they're not the kind of toe in the water baseball fans. They are hardcore baseball students of the game. They did their own show where they voted in their own baseball Hall of Famers last week, and that was an interesting way to listen to it. So go check that out. It'll be on Apple and Spotify. But we're here tonight to talk about what actually happened and maybe our reactions to it and what we might even think some of it means for the future. So, Austin, real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and turn over here to the overview vote. Just give everybody a feel for it because maybe some people hadn't even heard who's in, who's out. But the votes are in. Here's the 2025 votes. For those of you who want a comparison, here's the 24 votes. Okay. Um, Ichiro's in 99.7% of the vote. One person didn't vote for him. I promise we'll get to that. CC Sabathia is in with a higher vote total than I expected. I'm interested to get your take on it. He's in at 86.8%. And Billy Wagner, 10th year on the ballot, last year on the ballot, unless the committee were to save him in the future, he's in at 82.5%. We'll talk about the other players. Those are the three who get in off of this particular voting. Not talking about any committee results or anything, just this voting. So, Austin, first impulse, man, you look at the list, where you want to go?
Well, I think it's important to start at the top in this situation, talk about the guys who actually made it. It's, obviously biggest congratulations to those three guys. Not that they care anything about what I think, but Ichiro got 393 out of 394 possible votes. And I just want to say to the one guy who did not vote Ichiro, you better have turned in a blank slip because if you didn't vote for Ichiro, then I don't know who else on this list you think deserves to be in the Hall of Fame more than him.
Yeah.
So it better have been a blank slip. But that's all I want to say about that. I think it is asinine that this is a thing and that people care so much about, the unanimous, like whatever. I think it's hilarious and stupid that people care about that kind of stuff and are willing to leave a no doubt Hall of Famer off their ballot just so they're not unanimous.
Yeah.
Absolute clown show. But CC Sabathia, you nailed it. He got more votes than I'm was anticipating. I honestly did project him to be a first ballot guy, but I thought it would be by the skin of his teeth. I thought we were going to be seeing a 75 to 78 percentile guy, and he got, an extra 10% more than that. And I can't necessarily knock him. When I did my ballot, I absolutely voted for CC Sabathia. I think he's a very, very well-deserving player, has some great moments, and is still very involved in baseball today. And I think that's another reason why he's so well liked is because he's still very involved as I don't know what his exact title of his role is, but he's basically like an assistant to the commissioner of baseball, and the relations with the players and stuff like that. He's a media guy and an overall great dude, great player, no doubt Hall of Famer in my mind. Um, and then lastly, Billy Wagner gets in the year 10 bump. We kind of saw it was coming. You know, you see that roughly like 9% jump that he had. Um, didn't need all that much. He only needed like 2% would have got him in, but went and got all the way up to 82.5%. No doubt a Hall of Famer in my book, a top five closer of all time, if honestly not second. Like there's an argument for second. I think Trevor Hoffman probably slides in there, but third or fourth easily. Um, Deserves to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, was absolutely dominant. I think maybe the bouncing around of teams doesn't necessarily help. I know um,
Right.
a
Right.
lot of guys who are associated with one team, and you can see this on this list. When a guy is associated
Hmm.
mostly with one team, they seem to have better results, or maybe just two teams, like CC with the Indians,
Yep.
now Guardians, and the Yankees, although he had a short half season with the Brewers where he was electric. Ichiro, obviously known for his time as a Mariner, bounced
Yeah.
around a ton at the end of his career, but obviously, like Ichiro's a Mariner. And then you see another guy who got a bunch of votes this year, Felix Hernandez and Dustin Pedroia, the third and the fourth highest vote getting players in their first year, both well known for being with one team. Felix with Seattle and Dustin
Oh
with
yeah.
Red Sox. So I think being associated with one team is a real boost for a Players Hall of Fame case, and that definitely hurt Billy Wagner, I think.
Yeah, I would agree all the way across the board. Let's start off again with Ichiro here. We've given Ichiro his own slot. I think he deserves it. His own space here. So let's go back to Ichiro, and I promise we're going to get several of these guys tonight. So if there's a particular guy you want to hear on in our audience, we're probably going to hit him tonight. Okay, but let's start off with Ichiro here. Um, what a career! I mean, had his own career in Japan first, right, where he was already kind of looked upon as one of the best ever to do it over there. He comes over here. He's a 10-time All Star, 10-time Gold Glove. He picks up an MVP award. Um, he was known as a hitter for average, but boy, we all knew he had power reserves that he didn't get to. He we knew that while he was playing. That wasn't a secret. Well, not even a well guarded secret. We knew he could hit home runs if he wanted to. First ballot Hall of Famer, no doubter. I've got his statistics over here, his kind of counting statistics, if you will. Some of his WAR and his jaws over here. Tell me about Ichiro, man. Let's just celebrate him for a second.
What a special player. Obviously didn't come over until his age 27 season. And to put together a career in which you have over 3,000 hits and you didn't start your career until the age 27 is remarkable. But he really started off his career with a bang in that 0-1 season. The 0-1 Mariners, well known for having the best regular season of all time. That team was just a total monster, and he was at the head of it, winning the most valuable player in his rookie year. Only one of a handful of guys to do that. And yes, I know he's going up against a lot of younger opponents who haven't had a full career in another league at that time, but still a ridiculous season. I think that season he batted 350, which was still, I think, only the third best batting average of his career.
Yeah,
Um,
of his career.
yeah, it's just ridiculous numbers. Arguably his best season though was in '04. If you're going off wins above replacement, that's your WAR, which is not a perfect stat. And I'll be the first to
Right.
admit it is extremely flawed, but it's the best we've got at just an all-encompassing metric for a player's offensive abilities,
Yeah.
both at the dish and on the bases, and what that player brings to the team from a defensive side, which we
Yeah.
all know Ichiro did not lack in defensive capabilities. Won 10 gold gloves and had an incredible cannon out in right field, is well known for making really great throws, both with precision and power from the outfield. He was not a guy who you ran on. You did not take the extra base when the ball got to Ichiro out in right field. Uh, man, one thing about Ichiro's career I did want to talk about is how he is sort of maybe the last, the tail end of of an era where batting average really matters. You have guys like
Right,
Luis Ariz now, but they are the kind of unicorn, the outlier. Ichiro was a part of a generation that had many guys who tried to hit for average,
right.
and he stood out amongst them all. And I think that's a testament to what he could do. But I wonder how much his career would change if he was playing in modern day baseball, where because he had that kind of reserve power that he didn't tap into. And if he was playing in modern baseball, I think he would have tapped into that. And I think his career high in home runs in a season was 15. I think he could have hit 30
Oh
if
yeah,
he
I
had
agree.
really, really tried for it. Now, his batting average, the year he hit 15 home runs, he batted 303. Maybe he would have batted 290 and hit, 28 home runs. Like that's what modern baseball's about. That's not what Ichiro is about. And I think it's really awesome to kind of see that difference and kind of play that mind game of, well, what would his numbers have looked like if he played in modern baseball?
Listen, I got to watch baseball all through the '90s, and so I was still watching baseball a lot at the time when Ichiro came along, and we'd always kind of known and heard how good the Japanese leagues were, and we knew they were good. We knew that they were comparable in some ways to MLB, but until you brought a guy over here, and we heard Ichiro coming, man, we heard he was coming, and you always wonder, is he going to be as good over here as he was over there? And sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes it's yes. In Ichiro's case, he was every bit as good here. He was dominant. I mean, from the get go, from the very outset. I mean, he was on Sports Center every freaking night, and he wasn't even hitting a whole bunch of home runs to do it. It's just like this guy's incredible. Loved watching him play. Um, just outstanding. We could probably sit here all night and talk about Ichiro. I'm not going to get much deeper into him on that. But hats off to Ichiro. You deserved the 100% ballot, but oh well. At the end of the day, you're in, and you're in by a lot. It wasn't even close. So hats off to Ichiro Suzuki here. I'm going to take us back here to the overview board, and you tell us who you want to talk about next. We've got some pitchers clustered, we've got some hitters clustered, and then we've even got guys up and down the board that maybe need a little bit of attention too.
I want to jump to the probably the pitching group next because I think it's a really interesting case. I think we had a handful of guys right here. Yeah, we have Felix Hernandez, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner. CC and Billy both getting in. Felix having a respectable first year on the ballot, but not necessarily close to getting in at just 20%. But uh, with Billy Wagner, a dominant pitcher in every sense of the word. I believe he was just shy of 12 Ks per nine, and that's really impressive today, but just absurd in the era that he played. His career spanned from the late 90s to I think 2010. I want to say it was his final year, and he played in an era where Ichiro was up to bat all the time, and several players who cared about trying to get on base and not striking out. But he
Yeah,
was just absolute dominant, striking guys out left and right. I think just shy of 1,200 strikeouts. And then another important stat for a closer and really any reliever is their WHIP, which is their walks plus hits per inning pitch, which you see in that column right there. Um, Less than one, a sub one whip. So basically, that meant on average, when he came in to pitch a game, not a single player got on, whether it be a walk or a hit. Uh, Nobody reached, and super dominant, over 400 saves, a 2.3 ERA. When you look at the WAR numbers and stuff like that for closing pitchers, it doesn't do them justice. I like to throw that number out for closers. I just don't think it gives an
right.
accurate representation of kind of what they provided to a team because
Mm-hmm.
they're asked to do so little but matter so much. It's like they're like the
Right.
kickers of football, right? Like they like you don't. like when you have a good closer or a good kicker, you take it for granted. But when you have a bad one and they come in and screw it up all the time, you are screaming and cussing at your TV like, "What the heck are we doing? Why can't we get a good one?" Um, so yeah, I think it's a very undervalued, underappreciated position. And if he had not made it on, I think it sets a pretty tough precedent for guys because we have three guys who are currently still playing baseball, and Aroldis Chapman, Kenley Jansen, and Craig Kimbrell, who I think are all three Hall of Fame caliber closing pitchers. But if Billy Wagner did not get in, that would have been tough. That sets a pretty tough precedent. But now that he's in, I think it makes it sets a nice precedent, which I think a lot of Hall of Fame voting is about what precedents have been set. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to another player towards the end of the show. But I do appreciate that he got in because I think it helps those kind of modern age guys.
Yeah, I agree. Because even to say, and I agree that it's precedent, but even if it wasn't precedent, you're getting a glimpse into the mind of the current voters, right? Some of these
Mhm.
guys vote for 40 years, man.
Yeah,
I mean, they are the establishment, you know,
yeah,
like they're telling you kind of what they're thinking, and it alters each 5 years as new voters come in, but still, man, they're giving you a glimpse at what they're already thinking. So if they're thinking, hey, really dominant closer, relief pitcher Wagner gets in. It takes a while, but he's in. Then it's certainly precedent or just glimpse into the mind. It gives you a real good indicator that, hey, these other guys have a legit chance to get in too. It's not just a pie in the sky dream.
absolutely. Yep. And then when we go to our two first year guys, one of them obviously makes in, the other doesn't. And when you look at their two numbers side by side, it's like, yeah, obviously CC Sabathia has, 500 more strikeouts, reached 3,000 in that play, pitched over 500 games, 150 more than Felix Hernandez. Like obviously he gets in, but you're looking at a star that burned very bright for a shorter period of time in Felix Hernandez versus a guy in CC whose peak was much shorter and probably not quite as dominant, to be honest, as Felix,
Right.
which is it's
Right.
tough to say because CC had a couple really solid years there in
He
early
did.
and in the middle of his career, but um yeah, Felix just was so dominant for a short period of time, and 15 years obviously isn't a short period of time, but his peak was
Right.
relatively short, and then I guess it's not necessarily as much about the peak as it is about the valley. Like when you fall off, what can you sustain? You see guys all the time who have these great careers and then they have this nice, slow, tapered finish, maybe having a
Yep.
good bounce back year or two in there before kind of finally fading into non-existence. And that's what CC did. His age 35 season, he put up 3.1 WAR, just kind of as that last like hill of like, oh, I can still do this, and then before, finally they can't anymore. Felix did not have that. Felix, for some reason, injuries is a big reason why, but just kind of
Yeah.
lost it. And when he lost it fully. And there's just really not much you can do when that happens to you, and it really hurts the end of your career because he doesn't get those extra 4 years of mediocrity that would have gotten
Right.
him to those kind of counting stats that are so important.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I think he's got a shot. I do think he's a Hall of Famer in my opinion. He has a perfect game, Cy Young. He has so many of the things that are necessary, and he is sort of this first. He's kind of ushering in the modern age pitcher where they did not throw as many innings and they care more about strikeouts and give up necessary maybe some more hits and
Yeah.
walks especially. But I
Right.
think he's another precedent guy who are we going to let a guy in who only has 169 wins? Like the goal used to be a 300 win
Yep.
career. We're never going to see
300.
that again. Is the goalpost has been moved to 200
Right.
and he is 31 shy of that even. So like this is a goalpost moving situation. Like
It
are
is.
we willing to move the goalpost back or are we willing to get rid of that whatsoever? We've seen it in the Cy Young voting. Wins don't matter in a Cy Young race anymore. whatsoever. That's has been out the window for 5 or 6 years at this point since Jacob deGrom went on those tears in the late 2010s. So I think we might be at the point when Felix gets in that we kind of throw wins out the window and say, let's look at your rate stats, like your ERA and your WHIP. And so, like, how good were you when you were out there doing it? Which I think is, in my opinion, more important than limping to the finish and kind of getting it done for a few years. I think kind of having that great peak is more important.
Yeah, and for me, I would agree. And I'll go back decades here to the Sandy Koufax thing, right, where he basically had 6 untouchable years. You
Mhm.
couldn't touch him, and then it wasn't even a super long career like we see some guys have. I would have voted for Felix over CC if I could only get one guy in right away. I'll kick it back to you for the final word on that because you study it so much deeper. But when I saw Felix the most, I didn't. Granted, I didn't watch him a lot during his fall down years. Right when I watched him at his peak, he was scary. This guy was untouchable at his peak. I mean, day in day out. I mean, it was sick. Not the disrespect CC, who, like you said, had some heck of a years. How's a Cy Young to show it for it, man? Those are hard to get. Those Cy Youngs, but it felt like CC's was longer and maybe not as high. And Felix, obviously, when I watched him, was just scary as all get out. There were days I felt like you had no chance against Felix, and a lot of days, during his peak. So, I would you, given a choice, if you could only put one guy in right away, would you put Felix in, or would you go ahead and let CC in because he did have an excellent career here too?
Yeah, if I only had one vote, it would go to CC. He
Okay.
has a Cy Young as well. And
Mm-hmm.
he has an ALCS MVP, which I think is very important. Postseason
Yeah,
success is not necessary by any stretch of the means in baseball. You know, if there's a chance you're on an incredible team and don't even, or you're an incredible player and don't even make the playoffs due to poor teams, and this is going to be
not
a
even close.
Mike Trout conversation, a decade from now, if not hopefully longer, because 5 years and then you get in. So hopefully it's longer than a decade from now, but if it is, that'll be the conversation we're having. Um, but when you do get there and you do have success, I do think it is a nice boost. And this is like your Andy Pettit, a guy who's well known for his playoff heroics. So won a World Series, won the ALCS, has a Cy Young, and really reached those milestones that we used to find so important because he is of a different age. I mean, like literally he is like 6 years older than Felix Hernandez. Like he's
Yeah,
sort of these two guys had the overlap in their careers where CC kind of oversaw the transition. Felix didn't necessarily like he was very young in his career when that transition was taking place um towards the kind of the modern age pitcher. But yeah, if I had to pick just one of the two guys, I'd go CC. But um yeah, nothing against Felix there, just sort of CC has that sort of really nice prime as well as the counting stats.
yeah,
It's a nice combo.
he does. The bell curve is there, so to speak, in a way when you look at
Yes.
the statistics. We're going to come back to some pitchers later on in the episode. We're going to roll over to some hitters here in just a second. Anything else on these three guys? Kind of final word here, as two of them are in, and one of them's got a chance here over the next few seasons.
Yeah, I'll just say to Felix about Felix, I think he does get in at some point.
Okay.
I don't think it'll be next year, but I do think he gets in at some point.
Okay, awesome. So maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now, Felix, the door opens up there as he starts to grow that. All right, let's talk about some hitters here. Um, we've got 4 hitters up here for vastly different reasons. Okay, so if some of y'all are like, "Hey, what are you doing?" We'll explain it. We'll get to it here. I've got Carlos Beltran up here. I've got Andrew Jones up here. I've got Ben Zobrist up here. I've got Dustin Pedroia up here. Where do you want to start at? We got all kinds of different directions to go here on the hitters.
So we're gonna go in order of like the percent votes they got this year. Carlos Beltran was just a little bit shy of reaching the Hall of Fame. I think he hit the 70% mark, which is a really important spot to get to, and he has plenty of time left. I think we're looking at a Hall of Famer Yeah, 70.3%. And that was a big
Yeah.
jump. He had like 13% jump this year.
Yeah.
And if you're unfamiliar with why Carlos Beltran, because let's go back to that stats page real quick.
Hmm.
Um, it's pretty gross. I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous the numbers he put up. Over 300 career stolen bases, 1,500 runs, over 400 home runs. Didn't quite reach the 3,000 hit mark, but passed the 2,500 mark. That's now become a really solid metric to reach. And his rate stats are incredible. You know, a 350 on base percentage for his career, and scored. I don't think I even mentioned he scored 1,500 runs
Yeah.
and reached 70 career wins above replacement. So just a really, really incredible career and a nine-time All-Star and won the Clemente Award and was the Rookie of the Year and won three Gold Gloves. What's the catch? Well, I'll tell you what the catch is. It's the Astros. He won the World Series with the 2017 Trashstros, who are famous for banging on trash cans. And he was, by all accounts, the veteran in the clubhouse who kind of was pushing the charge on that. He was at the very forefront of it. And that has really stained his career. But we're seeing people get over that now. As time passes, some wounds heal, some don't. The Astros scandal wound is seeming to have healed. And I think we're both seeing this in modern day baseball where the Astros aren't getting nearly as much um, I guess, hate from fans. The fans still dish it
Right.
out plenty, but it's not as much as it used to be. And then the players, their colleagues, don't seem to be holding that against anyone at this point in their careers either. So I think that scandal has subsided, and we'll see Carlos Beltran and reach his way to the Hall of Fame. There's still going to be some guys who leave him off the ballot for that, absolutely, but I think we're going to see him reach the Hall of Fame shortly because, I mean, his career numbers just are pretty much a lock for him to get into the Hall of Fame. It's just that sort of slight ding against him, the character clause or what have you. Uh,
Without
yeah.
without glossing over with a wide brush, we'll talk about Beltran for a second because there's all kind of reasons to keep a guy out, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
it's strictly numbers based, but sometimes there's a lot of other things hitting hard. If you had a vote, um, would you put and again, it depends on the class you're in, right? That's really one of the
Yes.
heaviest things. But if you had a vote, how quickly would you want to get Beltran in? Would you hold it against him at all? This Astros, Trastros stuff, or would you get him in just as quick as you could?
At this point, I'm ready to get him in. I'm not holding it
Okay.
against him any longer. I think when he first kind of reached the ballot a few years ago, I want to say he's in his fourth year now. Does that sounds right? Yeah, or third year. This is his third year. So like a few years ago when it was still a little bit fresh, uh that's when you're going to see more people hold it against him, but
Okay.
um I think as we've seen baseball kind of I don't necessarily want to say sweep it under the rug. That's what obviously Rob Manfred and baseball wants to happen to it, but
Right.
I don't know if it will ever necessarily just be swept under the rug like that. But as it sort of kind of gets left in the rearview mirror per se, I think we're kind of getting over that and voting him in now. If I'm a writer and I've got him on my ballot, he's getting a vote for me.
All right. Fair enough. Let's hit Andrew Jones next. This is, I think, if I'm reading it right, this was his eighth. This is his eighth year on the ballot. He's all
Yes.
the way up to 66.2% now. Last year he was at 61.6%. I'll let you figure out the difference on that because I'm not that smart.
Yeah, 4.5%
Um,
we'll call it.
okay, 4.5%. It is growing, but it is year number eight. Let's talk about Andrew Jones for a second.
So, I mean, let's just go ahead and get the elephant in the room. He's 66% of the way there, so he needs quick maths, 9%, 4.5 times two is nine. If he just makes this 4.5% leap that he went from last year to this year, he gets
Okay.
in by just the very skin of his teeth in year 10.
Yeah.
But there is something we like to call the year 10 bump. And it's when a
Hmm.
player has sat on the ballot for so long and they've been a guy, at the 50 to 60% range. That year 10, a lot of people go, well, we've made him wait long enough. Whether whatever the knock was against them, whether it be a guy who necessarily character clause or just didn't necessarily end his career in the way you wanted. A lot of those guys get that bump in year 10, and we saw it with this year with Billy Wagner because he jumped quite a bit. Like I said, he didn't need to jump all the way
Right.
up to 83%, but he did. And I think we see Andrew Jones make it in not next year, but in his final year on the ballot. And he's another guy. When you look at his stats, or let's talk about just his prime, really. You're talking about a player who was elite. Led the league in home runs one year with
Yeah.
over 50. Not a lot of guys get over 50 in a season. He's done it. And he has 10 gold gloves, and not just any gold gloves, center field gold gloves,
Yes.
and was just ridiculous. Like, as growing up as a Braves fan, Andrew Jones was a living highlight reel. Every night in center field, he was making just ridiculous catches out there. He is, in my opinion, the best defensive center fielder to ever play the game. And I know there's no way of really comparing him to guys like your Willie Mazes who played in a time so long ago. But if you were able to go and watch Andrew Jones defensive highlights, he was so elite for so long, and really did it from his entire time when he broke into the league at 19 years old and until he was honestly about 30. Like he had a good 10-year stretch there where I think he literally won Gold Glove every single year for those
Yeah.
10 years. But like um yeah, he had a nice stretch where he was just the absolute best center fielder in baseball and put up crazy power numbers. He had over 400 career home runs. The thing that he didn't do well was hit for average. He wasn't a
Right.
base hits guy. He is just shy of 2,000, and that's something that is really holding against him. And the reason he didn't get to that 2,000 is because he fell off at the end of his career really hard.
Yeah.
When he left Atlanta and did his tour of, I think he went Dodgers, Texas, White Sox, Yankees, I think was the order. It was rough. He didn't necessarily put up any good numbers anywhere except for the White Sox. He was okay at,
Right.
but like, not good, and was honestly just downright bad. Other than that one kind of stint with the White Sox, so that really hurt him. If he could have played until he was maybe like 38, because I think he retired at 35, if he could have gotten played well enough to get another 3 years added to his career, he easily reaches a few more milestones
Yeah.
that are necessary. Like he could have definitely would have reached that 2,000 hit mark, but a few other milestones would have helped as well. So that's kind of the Andrew Jones clause, or case of burned really bright and then kind of fell off, much like Felix Hernandez. So I am anticipating him getting in that year 10 bump,
Hmm.
but if he doesn't, that's tough. That again, this is another sort of precedent setter that if he doesn't make it in, it's going to be really hard to get in without 2,000 hits. It's going to be
Right.
really because he has a really strong case other than that.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, when it comes to Andrew Jones, it really is just all analytical. There's no issues keeping him out. It's what do you honestly just think of him as a player? I'm on the fence with him as a hitter. And listen, I'm old as dirt. I watched the Braves before they had all these great new rookies come through, and they were killing it in the '90s. They had the best farm system in the league, other than maybe the Dodgers, but I think theirs was better, to be honest. We got these new guys every year, every single season. There were two or three new guys that were coming in that hit, man. I mean, they nailed it. They came through. They were legit MLB players, and some of them Hall of Famers. It was awesome. It was so much fun to watch it. And he was one of this crew. But even if I'm on the fence with him as a hitter for Hall of Fame, and I am, his defense, you mentioned it, was so good. His range was so good. Like, not only did he have the great catches, but his range was literally from dead center of left field to dead center of right field. That's where he could get to. He frequently made these catches that he just kind of captained over both the outfield. So he's basically covering 2/3 of the outfield here with a pretty good arm. I don't remember exactly how good of an arm he had. You can tell me on that. I thought it was fine, but his range was insane. So he's getting the balls that other people don't even get to. And then, oh, by the way, he's got the athletic catches every night that show up on Sports Center. So his defense alone was Hall of Fame worthy. And then you add kind of a split fence offensive to it. It just the power alone. So I'm totally happy with him getting in 100%. The defense was so good. It's hard to describe that defense. It really is. That's why we try to come up with numbers to kind of cover it because it's really hard to describe that. But his defense was maybe the best ever out there in center field. I think it was the best I ever saw during my time of watching. So, anything else on Andrew Jones here?
Yeah, you mentioned like the power. It's he's just one of those in-betweeners
Right.
who is he a power hitter, but he's a center fielder? Like he was a really good power hitter, not necessarily a great power hitter, other than a couple seasons like that 50 home run season. If he had multiple of those and had hit 500 home runs instead of 430, then we're talking about a surefire Hall of Famer. But sort of that really solid power, but not good enough average to kind of balance it. But yeah, it's the defense that is the real like part that should get him over. Let's talk about Dustin Pedroia next. First
Yes,
year
I'm looking for
guy.
him on the board. There he is. First
Yeah, you
time
found
guy.
him.
Got 11.9% of the vote. Yeah.
A solid number, respectable 11.9%. There are Hall of Famers who got less than that on their first ballot. I think Billy Wagner only had like 10% on his first time on the ballot. So he's not out of the running by any stretch of the means. But he's a guy who dealt with injuries late in his career, also only played till age 35, and really only age 33 because only played 9 games in his last 2 seasons, and that's combined 9 games, not nine each. So
Wow.
yeah, really had a really solid career early where he won Rookie of the Year in '07 that would have been, and then won the MVP in '08. So started his career burning really bright, won a Gold Glove that year he won the MVP at, and then was an All-Star for 3 consecutive years. Threw in a few more Gold Gloves during his career, a few more um, All-Star appearances, but the counting numbers just don't really get there, unfortunately. 1,800 hits, batting average at 299 is unfortunate, but
Yeah.
didn't reach 1,000 runs scored, didn't reach 1,000 RBIs. It's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, he was really solid, but not for very long. And it was probably a similar stretch to Andrew Jones of 10 years where he was just really good, had an MVP in that time frame, which Jones never did. But uh Pedroia's defense was above average, not potentially the best we've ever seen. And so his counting stats are
Right.
worse.
Yeah.
And the there's really not one thing to hang your hat on. Where Jones, I think, has two in the home runs
Yes.
and the defense. You can kind of hang your hat on an MVP, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
but that's like his best case. Also, I guess technically won a World Series as well, which cool, but he wasn't like, two World Series actually. He would have won it twice with the Red Sox, but wasn't the MVP of either of those series or anything like that. So just not quite enough to hang your hat on to the point where I would be willing to vote him into the Hall of Fame. But goalposts get moved. And as we start to see more players of his counting stats, like if Andrew Jones gets in, that helps Dustin Pedroia. Absolutely. If Jones doesn't get in, I don't see any way Pedroia gets in. I don't think it would be possible. But if Jones gets in, which I think he will, that brings the goal closer to Dustin and it helps him out. So I don't
Yeah.
think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I do think it is slightly towards a long shot, but I do think we see him remain on the ballot. That 11%, unless he just completely loses a bunch of votes. But This was a pretty strong Hall of Fame class, and he got 11% in it, which I think says something. I think when the weaker classes come through in the next couple of years, which there are going to be, I know next year's classes is fairly weak, so I think he might even gain some traction next year. And that's what it's about. It's about kind of there's a you have to reach that 75%, and some guys are going to plateau before they get there, and some guys are going to get there. And it's kind of finding your plateau. Certain guys, they reach 35% and then they're just stuck there. And they'll be at 35% for the last 5 years they're on the ballot. And they're just going to get that
Right.
year 10 bump and get them to like 45%. And that's very well could be the case for Dustin Pedroia. But either way, if you are someone who gets on a Hall of Fame ballot and sticks on it, gets that 5%, that's really awesome. And that is worth noting. So yeah, Dustin Pedroia, awesome player, super fun to watch. And I know a lot of Red Sox fans who personally think he should be in the Hall of Fame, but I'm currently got him on the outside looking in, at least for now, this early in the run.
I'm in the same boat. If you were say a casual baseball fan who happened to see Pedroia during his best years, because you weren't even a Red Sox fan, right? You saw him during his best years and you remembered him that way. You might think, okay, yeah, probably Hall of Fame, maybe. But then you actually get back into the numbers, and the case just isn't great on the number standpoint. The batting average is good, but other than the batting average, you're kind of starting to lean back on, hey, really good for a handful of seasons, got an MVP, kind of a history flavor of great effort. Red Sox kind of a guy is really where you're going to have to start pulling that together if you're wanting to put him in the Hall of Fame. And again, it wouldn't make me mad, but I wouldn't be voting for him based on what I've seen here. Let's talk Ben Zobrist for a second, and then we'll just go back to the overall list and wrap up any thoughts we've got on the list over there. I know some people are saying, why Ben Zobrist? All right, but we're going to get into him because he is a bit of a unique case here. So, Austin, walk us through Ben Zobrist here and Hall of Fame perspective.
Yeah, Ben Zobrist didn't receive a single vote, and I think that is unfortunate and sad, and it sets a slightly bad precedent, in my opinion. Ben Zobrist, by all numbers you're seeing on the screen here, not a Hall of Famer. But the numbers cannot tell the whole story. They can hardly even tell half the story, in my opinion. Ben Zobrist is a guy who's a switch hitter who played multiple positions at high levels and has clutch moments, including MVP of a World Series. Not just any World Series, the 108-year curse broken of the Chicago Cubs when they won the World
Hmm.
Series in 2016. Ben Zobrist was the MVP of that series. So, baseball history, he has that, check mark of a clutch moment where he has like one of the highest, there's a stat called like championship win probability added, which is deep into the sabermetric rabbit hole. He is like a top 20 championship win probability added hit of all time and won the World Series MVP. So that's a check mark off his board. And then switch hitter, which is another thing that like as soon as you say switch hitter, that lowers the standards because there's just not as many of those, and it's more
Right.
impressive when you can do it from both sides of the plate. So that brings the goalpost a little bit closer as well. And then that's kind of where you get hung up because the numbers still aren't great. Not
Right.
even an 800 OPS. Batting average wasn't great. Not a lot of home runs. Stolen bases were solid, over 100, but nothing crazy. Didn't have 1,000 RBIs. Didn't have 1,000 runs scored. Like there's just nothing there that tells you this guy's a Hall of Famer. Didn't have a single Gold Glove. Didn't have a single Silver Slugger.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. You know why he never got those awards is because he didn't play a position. Ben Zobrist is what you call a super utility man.
Yes.
He provided something to his teams that cannot be quantified. He would switch position from game to game and from inning to inning. He would start a game at shortstop, slide to left field, and then go over to right field all in the same inning or all in the same game. And then the next game, He'd play second base and center field. He would play, five different positions across the 2 game stretch. And what that allowed his manager and his team to do in terms of matching up and getting your best lineup out there every single day, depending on
Yeah,
who's healthy, what pitcher's throwing, and who's hot. Like those are the three things that matter when you're setting up a lineup. And Ben Zobrist was, I'm a fan of chess. I like chess. He was a queen on the chessboard. He could move in any direction you wanted to, and he did it really well. He was an elite defender. Not just, he wasn't one of those like kind of shout out Mookie Betts, who's a great player, but like he wasn't a Mookie Betts who can play shortstop, and he's a warm body there, and he'll field you some balls, but like you're losing something when Mookie Betts plays shortstop. When Ben Zobrist moved around to whatever position you wanted him, you didn't lose anything. He was great
wow.
there. And he reminds me, there's a player who I think you might know of. He's famous for his time. I remember with the A's in the late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember him. I wasn't alive back then, but like that's who, when I think of this player, I think of him with them. Tony Phillips. You remember Tony Phillips?
Heck yeah, baby. Yep.
He is like a supercharged Tony, and Tony Phillips is a great player. And Tony Phillips' numbers and Ben Zobrist are comparable, but Tony Phillips didn't have the sort of award of World Series MVP that Zobrist has. But I think Zobrist is a really interesting case for this super utility man that we're seeing more of in baseball. And nowadays, I think last year was the first year they added an actual award, a Silver Slugger for a utility man. Mookie Betts was the utility man Silver Slugger.
Okay.
If that was around when Ben Zobrist was playing, he would have won seven of them, right? Like he was a great hitter for what he did. He wasn't and he wasn't of the caliber to reach that everyday position. I think a modern day equivalent would be like Jose Ramirez for the Guardians. He kind of came up and you're like, oh, he's a utility player. He's going to play a little third, a little second. He's going to bounce around. Well, Jose Ramirez became such a good ball player that they had to find a position for him to play, and so he stuck at third. Zobrist never quite reached that level, but he did the utility man better than anyone else. And I think it's unfortunate and honestly kind of a shame that he didn't reach single vote. He's obviously never getting to the Hall of Fame. I don't want this to be a case that Ben Zobrist should be
Right.
a Hall of Famer, but I think he should have stuck on the ballot. He should have reached the 5%. And I think he should have stuck around and let the nerds really dig into him every year and just bump that slowly up. And maybe he would have reached 40% someday. And I
Right.
think that would really help out the future utility players who are going to be coming on the ballot in years to come. So that's why I want to talk about Ben Zobrist, not because I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but because he is a unique case study and it sets a negative precedent in this case where he got zero votes.
Listen, it's a fascinating case here. Um, Zobrist is a manager's dream, okay?
Hmm.
Because when you're looking to fill nine spots in the lineup and get your best matchups based on analytics, but you got to move people around to do it, and you've got 162 games to fill out, and you don't want to hurt yourself when you do make the switches, and you don't want to hurt yourself when you plug somebody in to hit. Somebody needs to do that. He's the guy that did that, then even more than I realized, because I had to go back and remind myself of what all he did. And you go over to say Baseball Reference, which is a site
Hmm.
that I love, and you look up his positions year by year. Almost every number, I think maybe other than catcher, every number on the field is like for every single season, right? He played them all. That's why I've got him listed as the infielder outfielder here. I mean, it's and it's amazing. Listen, no sport, there is no sport on the face of the planet that comes anywhere near to having as much analytics in it as baseball, and yet we still haven't quite gotten to where the public can put a handle on this guy with what all he really did in terms of offering the flexibility, the matchup value that it allowed other people to have better roles. Also, him not being bad at the plate, 266 career average there as far as being able to swing a bat too. Um, Hard to really quantify that in a way that people will understand. And again, we're not making a Hall of Fame case here, but we're just kind of laying the groundwork for future players that maybe have a little bit better offensive numbers to go along with this super flex.
And he didn't have the high average, but he did get on base. He had a really high on base percentage. He walked a lot, which I think is important as well. But I want to talk about, you mentioned how you see every number there except catcher. Literally he has one inning or more at every single position in baseball besides catcher, and he only has one inning pitched. And you know what he did in that inning? One inning, and he struck out future Hall of Famer Yadier Molina, and that was his last appearance in Major League Baseball, if I remember correctly. I think that was the last thing he
Wow.
did on a professional baseball field was strike out Yadier Molina, which I think is pretty cool.
I love it. We are getting to the end of this show, but we would be amiss if we didn't at least quickly mention some other names that are probably maybe even in the public eye a little bit more noteworthy even than some of the guys we've already talked about tonight. So it's a big board. There's 28 guys up here. We didn't cover them all, but Austin, um, where do you want to go as we kind of wrap up here? Maybe two, three, four names here.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily want to talk about the guys kind of at the top who I didn't mention, like the Chase Utleys, the A-Rods, the Manny Ramirez, because well, Manny Ramirez maybe, nah. I'll talk about them in the future and next year. They're going to be on the ballot again, and they're probably not getting in next year anyways. So
Right.
they're discussions for years to come. I think the guys down the board are obviously more interesting. Your guys like your Mark Burleys, your Francisco Rodriguez, your David Wrights, and your Torrey Hunters. These are guys who are potentially going to be falling off the ballot at some point. They've probably not got a whole lot of time left. They might not ever reach this, 20, 30% number where they're comfortable on the ballot and going to stay there the rest of their 10-year time here. These
Right.
guys could fall off any given year. So I just wanted to give them kind of a shout out. They were all fantastic players. I think
Yep.
K-Rod, Francisco Rodriguez, now that Wagner's in, he is the best reliever on the ballot, and he's going to get a boost, I think. Burley, probably not going to see much. David Wright, you kind of have to hope that Andrew Jones gets in, and then David Wright maybe has a chance. And then
Okay.
Torrey Hunter
Yeah.
actually lost percentage this year. I think he was the only guy who was on the ballot last year to lose votes, and that's never a good sign. Sometimes it works out. I remember a guy like Larry Walker lost votes early in his cycle and then kind of skyrocketed late. I don't see that happening with Torrey Hunter. I think he's probably kind of at the end of his time on the ballot. But Torrey Hunter was an awesome ball player. Um, really fun to watch. It was one of my favorite center fielders to watch growing up. And then to all the names who didn't, make it besides Ben Zobrist, who I've already talked about, all fantastic players. I mean, Brian McCann and Troy Tulowitzki were two names that I watched a ton of growing up. As a Braves fan, watching Brian McCann, and then Tulo was just this wizard playing shortstop, man. He was so much fun, had the power, had the swag, just like his teammate Carlos Gonzalez, who fell off the ballot again. Just these guys were so like awesome to watch as a kid, and it hurts a little bit on the inside seeing it. They didn't aren't going to be on the ballot anymore. I wish I could just keep them on the ballot. I know they're never going to make it, but I wish I could just keep
Right.
them on the ballot. They were all fantastic players. Some of them did it for a really long time, and just kind of at a mediocre level. And then some of the guys, like your Hanley Ramirez, just had like super awesome, crazy good years, and Tulo as well, just
Yes.
crazy good years for a few years, and then just kind of injury bug or whatever caught them. But I think those are all fun names, and that you should, as a baseball fan, kind of respect and appreciate, and maybe go watch some of their highlights. Just kind of remind yourself of like, hey, these are some really good ball players. Unfortunately, they call it the Hall of Very Good. Um, Not quite a Hall of Famer, but a Hall of Very Good player.
Yeah. Listen, I agree. There's something very emotional about it with baseball that often doesn't come as frequently strong as it does in the other sports. But it's maddening as a fan and as a player, both in football. You don't see this much in basketball. Usually, a good basketball player is good his whole time. But in football and even more so in baseball, it's not unusual to see a guy on fire for two, three, five, 6 seasons and that's it. I mean, there's either a huge fall off because of injuries or people figure him out and he kind of never readjusts. As a player individually, that's got to be maddening to know, oh my gosh, I was so good for 3, 4 seasons. And as a fan, you watch this guy and it's like, my gosh, he was untouchable every day. He just did everything to help his team. not just at the plate, but in the field and in leadership and in attitude. And you're like, dadgummit, now that his career is 5 years over and we go back and look at the whole thing, he doesn't fit. And unfortunately, the voters agree. And so these guys, man, McCann, same thing there. I mean, these guys are not gonna hang around on the ballot, unfortunately. But you're right; they're an integral part of our memories and of the teams they were on. They were integral for a certain period of time there. One final question I think I've got for you here, and listen, we can have all Hall of Fame questions all day, but from a history standpoint, could you kind of open the show with this, right? You tend toward a more expansive voting allowance here. Um, let's assume that for now we still kind of have this core of kind of old school writers. I'll put them that way for now,
Yeah.
and let's even kick out the PED guys or the grudge guys. Let's kick them out. Just let's say they're old school core, right?
Mhm.
Would you be open to the idea of maybe even a separate kind of a voting wing or whatever, however you want to phrase it, group, where guys whose numbers really don't quite get up to Hall of Fame level, but they've also got a significant history attached to them, whether it's a World Series MVP or this amazing season where they were historically great for 1 year, getting them into that way and having kind of a separate thing, or are you pretty much Hall of Fame in or Hall of Fame out?
So that is an interesting point, and there is something called the committee selection, which is and this is
Right.
some people. Kurt Schilling famously said, "I don't like take me off the ballot. I don't want to get voted in by these writers. I want to get voted in by my peers." And the Hall of Fame committee is a player committee of former players who are voting to put their colleagues, their equals, who they played with and saw firsthand and knew what it was like to
Mm-hmm.
game plan around it and think about, oh, I've got this guy coming up to bat next inning. And those are the guys who some people honestly feel more honored to be voted in by.
Yeah.
And so the writers ballot obviously will stick around and is important, but the veterans committee that votes in players is an integral part of voting, and they kind of encapsulate and elevate players who don't get the recognition because maybe they weren't flashy, didn't make headlines, didn't really make waves around the league. But in the ball clubs and in the clubhouse, their name was mentioned quite a bit because you had to know like when like you had their name circled in red. If you're a pitcher, like hey, like this is the one of the guys I got to be worried about. And I think a good example, I think Brian McCann on this list is somebody who's going to get consideration by a veterans committee someday because he was an incredible power hitting catcher who was an elite pitch framer at a time where they didn't have the pitch framing data that we currently have.
Right.
But I think
Right.
he's somebody who in years from now is going to have a veteran committee look at, and they're going to be like, hey, like Ryan McCann was a dude. Like, should we vote him in? Maybe he won't get in, but he's an example of somebody who I think will get consideration from a veterans committee. I think there's a few other names on this list, like Curtis Granderson probably is another guy who's going to get looks from a committee sometime down the road. But um, yeah, it is important to have that second road and for it not to be the same writers. It should be the
Right.
colleagues. It's a
Yeah.
totally separate entity, and it is.
Austin, this has been fantastic. I've enjoyed it. First of all, any last words on the Hall of Fame here? And then after that, tell everybody where they can find you and more baseball stuff.
My last thoughts on the Hall of Fame. Again, the Hall of Fame is a museum. It is not necessarily a a place that you have to check a few boxes in order to get in. It's about preserving history and baseball history. So that's my look at it. I'm not a keep the hall small person. I think we should be more expansive and have more inclusion in the Hall of Fame. Some people think that that makes it less special. I think it makes it more special. If you want to hear more of me talk about the Hall of Fame, you can go check out my podcast at Tricky Takes. That's Tricky with two I's, Triicky Takes. We talk football a lot there, but a lot of baseball as well. And when spring comes around, we will be keeping you updated on the current, MLB landscape, what teams we think are going to be good, what teams we think are going to be bad, and giving all those stuff to talk about. So go check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Uh, it'll be there.
Austin, it's been great. We've really enjoyed the baseball deep dives, and trust me, if you're in the audience, this is really just the short end of the stick of what Austin gets into from an analytical perspective. So if you want more of that, go check it out. This is the Box Score Network. Really appreciate you guys watching, hanging on with us this long. We'll have more baseball stuff coming out over the next few months. Probably not right away, but in the future, we'll produce some more of that as well. Until next time, have a great one and goodbye, everybody.